G'day. This is an explanation on how to choose your rugby company as well as other tips for running your rugby company. The rugby simulator allows you to run a rugby business throughout the introduction to business course throughout the semester with yourself as well as one or two classmates. The purpose of this is to, as we learn different things in the class, to apply them in a experience such as this simulation is hopefully going to provide. I recognize some of you may not be familiar with rugby. That is fine. You are running a business which is primarily concerned with making money. And like any business, if you look at the industries that some of your family members are involved in, if you were to ask them when they were a child, what do they want to be when they grow up, that probably wouldn't be their choice. However, they chose that industry because somebody said, I will hire you. The same way when you are out of university, college, or finished high school, you will say, here's my resume, please hire me. And then from there, you'll have to learn about the industry. And they will teach you happily so that you get better and become a more productive member of their team. It's the same thing here. I will answer all your questions. You do not need to have any sort of rugby background. If anything, I think having a rugby background might be a little bit of a negative, because from there you might be more concerned with winning games than making money. And again, this is a business that deals with rugby. This is not a rugby company that happens to be a business. And hopefully you understand the differences between the two. On the YouTube site that I have this on, I'm going to have different points at which I start different parts of this video so that you can go quickly to those points if you decide to chunk this video, which I would suggest you do if you're not familiar with rugby or this simulation at all. Okay. First thing you get when you log in is the index page. Okay, so this is where you're going to start off. And it has a lot of information, for instance, what team played last, how they did. It might have a link about information about a team. It might have trade information. It might show you a match video from the game. Okay, and so it gives you a ton of information that you can scroll down in relation to once we get into the classroom. Unfortunately, GAPS as well as WireDSB does not have a way of supporting HTML or SHTML website content delivery, and so this will have to be accessed at school once we get in the building. However, in the meantime, I will be posting videos on my Lincoln Teaches site, as well as posting them on GAPS so that you have access to the information you need to make good decisions about your company. First thing you need to do is choose a company. So we're going to look at the companies that we have listed here. Now you'll notice we have a Tier 1 Premier Division. That means that these are the top teams as of last season, and a Tier 2 division, which are the second best teams overall. Do you realize at the end of the season, the bottom team in Tier 1 is relegated, which means they go down to Tier 2, and the top team in Tier 2 is promoted, so they go up. So just because a team is necessarily in Tier 1 does not mean that they are better than all the teams in Tier 2. And so please realize that. But we're going to click on the teams. Now, any team in orange is a team that has already been chosen by someone else, and you cannot choose. So please realize that. We're going to look at Bay Grizzlies, though, to start off with. Okay, and you might ask me, by the way, what does this number here mean? That's an indicator of their overall strength. However, as some owners in past intro to business classes have found out, this is not a good means of determining which is the best company. Actually, it's quite misleading. For instance, this company has been the best company for the past 3 seasons. They have not won in any of those seasons, so and have not made the most money either. So just some information in relation to that. Okay, let's continue. So we're looking at this company, and right away, whoa, Mr. Beta, way too much information. And as I said, break this down. Plus, in addition to that, you have their past history. Okay, which again, this past history is not that important to you, and so only for this team I'll be looking through it. But again, once you get on the website at school, you'll be able to just click team info and see it. You'll also be able to see past history from past seasons by clicking on the previous rosters that are listed. Okay. In addition to that, you can also click on players and see their information. We're going to refer to this one later on. Okay. But let's get back to their actual current website. Okay. Here you have a ton of information. You have the team name, Bay Grizzlies. Okay. You have the team attributes, which normally this is left at 75. If you notice, they are different. That's because the previous owners, for whatever reason, decided to change them. Now, whether that was a good decision or not, you might look at their net worth, which is a great indicator of how much money they've earned, as well as their overall success on the field, which we'll show you how to measure that later in terms of their standings, overall standings, to see how they did and whether these changes were successful. If you are new, if this is the first time you've ever looked at anything in relation to rugby, I would keep these at 75, okay? Or I would just leave them as is, okay? And again, you and your colleagues who are in your group, in your ownership group, and again, it'll be a maximum of 3 people per group, will make that decision, okay? This is just some information about the team. It is not important to your decision. Same thing with the stadium name or anything on this page, really. Okay, once you're on the website, you'll be able to go to the next team alphabetically, or you'll be able to click on the drop-down menu and just click a team. But for now, all this information is not really of pertinence to you when you choose a team. All you really want to focus on is what is the team name, and quite literally set up a T-chart if I'm you. So on one side you would put the Bay Grizzlies, and the next side you might put the next team, okay, that you're going to consider. You're going to look at both of them and say, which one do I like, which one what's the positives of each or negatives of each, and sort of compare them, and then from there choose a champion for you. And by a champion, I mean the team that you would want to have, and then do the same with the next team until you have sort of an order of your top 5 or so teams you'd like to choose. Okay. So, what do you need to consider? First thing you want to consider really is the net worth. Net worth is all the assets the company owns. In this case, the only assets you have are players and cash. And cash is indicated by your budget. It's indicated in euros, by the way. Okay. Now, these players all have a certain value, which we'll explain later, based on their skill rating, which is, that skill rating is determined upon their skills that they have. Okay, so these all equate to this, okay, out of 100. Okay, and each one of these can be as high as 100 or as low as 0. Okay. The age also impacts their net worth. Okay. The older they are, the less of a value that 81 is. The younger they are, the more of a value that 81 is, because they're deemed to be able to last for as long as you want them to. Okay. And so you'll need to look through your team and determine, well, how are my starters on the team? For rugby, like most sports, these 15 players right here are the most important players on your team because they are on the field throughout the game unless they get injured. Okay? And so your starter strength will indicate how good your starters are and how likely you are to most likely win matches and as a result acquire revenue from that, more revenue than your opponents. However, this is not the only indicator. Like certain sports, hockey's not the best example, but definitely other sports are. You also have bench players. These are players who normally don't start, but because players get injured or players get tired, they sub out, and then these players would come in during a match. Also, in rugby, when players do get injured, unlike other sports, they can be injured for months at a time. And so these players may end up being your regular starters throughout the season. There was one team last year, for instance, who 8 of their starters were injured for over half of the season. And so, in addition to having good starters, you want to make sure you have good bench players. And in addition to that, you also want to make sure you have adequate reserves in case the starter gets injured and the bench player gets tired or injured, and then you need to use the reserve player. Okay? And again, there's different positions. We're going to go through the positions later on just to explain that. But again, what are you looking at in order to determine what company you should choose? The net worth, the budget, starter strength, and then do they have adequate players, as well as do they have enough players, and how old are those players? Okay. Once a player turns age 30, their skill level will start decreasing. So up until age 30, their skill level may increase, although usually you have to train them. Once they turn age 30, their skill level starts to automatically decrease. Okay. Once they turn age 34, they can choose at the end of the season to retire. And we will be playing about 5 or so seasons throughout this semester, maybe a lot more. Okay, and so for instance, if I'm looking at this player, for instance, this player might retire at the end of the season. And so that all of a sudden, this player's value, which is part of your net worth, now becomes 0. And so you would have to explain why you felt it was a good idea to keep such an old player on there if they are not being used. Okay, maybe you should have traded him. Okay, but we'll get into what you're going to use this for later. At first, it's just going to be so that you understand how to use the information we learn in class in a practical setting. Okay, let's look at the other teams first. So we're going to go back and just look at other teams. And again, the teams in orange, like Bay, like Camelot, you cannot choose. However, Cliffstone is a team you can choose. And as I mentioned last semester, they had a slew of injuries, and unfortunately for them, they did not do well during the season. However, luckily for them, their starters did come back for the playoffs. And so as a result, they ended up in Tier 1. This is Lenita. And again, I'm just going through the teams again. Every team must have can have a maximum of 40 players, can have a minimum of 27. So Kashino would be the 27th player. And again, if this had 40 players, this would be filled to the max here. Because it's 3 spaces left, it only has 37. Okay. In rugby, you have 15 starters, 8 subs, and then the rest are reserves. Okay. Also, every season you will be getting 2 draftees, so you want to make sure, in actuality, that you have room for those 2 draftees, because if you don't, then you don't draft anybody. And age 18 players are very important to increase your net worth. This is another team in orange. You would not be allowed to choose them, but just so you can see what they have in case you want to propose a trade to that owner. This is the Magna Carta Crusaders, the Peace Warriors, the Union Saracens. By the way, in case you're ever wondering how I created these names, the first year I ran this, the students were allowed to choose the names of the teams. I have toyed with the ability for the new users to change the names of the teams. But for now, I'm going to not allow that this year, just because of well, I can't even get this website. I can't get website access with Gap, so I'm still trying to figure that out. So once I get that running, then I'll consider that possibly later on in the semester. But for now, no. Okay. But there are other things you can influence. You can influence the draftees' ethnicity. So I've had, when I was at Millikan, for instance, I had students who were Sri Lankan. They're like, sir, can we have Sri Lankan last names, Sri Lankan players? Sure. I've had other students who are from Spanish-speaking countries like Peru, like Ecuador, who have said, sir, can we have Spanish last names and first names? Sure. And so I don't mind doing that. Other students from Japan who are like, sir, we want to have Japanese last names. Sure. And so I do allow you a certain amount of customization in this if you're really interested. And again, if you have any suggestions for the website as well to make it more personal for you, do let me know. For instance, you'll see a map here with a number of the city names on it. It exists because one of your colleagues who was in this class years ago said, sir, I'd like to see a map with all the teams on it, the cities of the teams. And so I said, sure. And there also were other suggestions. Now, when we go through these little drop-down browsers, I'm just going to quickly look through them now. There's a number of pieces of information that may or may not be of interest to you. This is more historical. Okay, I had a student who was like, sir, we should be able to see who's the best team. Okay, and so I posted that. Another person was like, well, can we see the history of when these teams were created and their population? And it was the same guy who asked for the map, by the way. So I created a storyline for each team. Okay, some seasons we've had divisional MVPs, so I've included that as well because somebody asked for that the last time. Somebody asked for a Wikipedia-like history of the league, so I've written that. As you can see, it's kind of text-based, but I just sort of I've continued it along the way. Nobody's really asked for that of late. Net worth, this is a good indicator of what team you should be possibly pursuing. However, it is not the only thing. There are quite a few teams who have a lot of age 30 plus players, which would mean that if you get that team in the next year or two, their net worth might drop significantly because they have a whole ton of players retiring. So definitely consider this. Use this as a considerating factor on what teams you're going to pick, but also please make sure you check out their ages because you don't want to get a team that's going to have a whole bunch of problems in 2 or 3 seasons when you're running that company, say, in March or April, and then all of a sudden have these problems. Again, these are the past championships. As you can see, Camelot, they've done really well to get to the championships, but they haven't been able to beat a team that was lower than them for the past how many seasons. In fact, this team who's won the last 4 seasons, they actually have not been, if I remember correctly, ranked the highest team in the league. And so do realize these numbers over here are not indicative that a company is going to win and therefore make you the most amount of money. Rankings. These are really good indicators, not for past seasons, because past seasons there is different stuff, but teams have done a number of trades, and so these are very good indicators as to whether a team is expected to do well or not. And for the most part, they're kind of spot on, although as can be seen by last season going into the 2045 season, Lock Harbor North in 3 of those rankings only came first once, and they ended up winning the whole thing. So this is not truly indicative of who's going to do well and who is not. But if you see the same consistent scenario, then that might be indicative of what does happen. However, the West Division from last season would be a good indicator of that it's not necessarily always the case, because as you can see, Stornoway was ranked first, Ridgeway was ranked first, Rockyedge was ranked first, and in the end, Cliffstone was first. Okay, in terms of winning and making it to Tier 1. So So yeah. Rules. There's a number of rules that you really should read about in your spare time. These are things that once you choose your team, you'll need to consider. You probably should consider them before choosing a team. For instance, the amount of money you get might be an indicator of who you train and how well you're going to be able to do, and when you're going to run out of money. As you can see, some of the teams are in not the best financial shape because the people who ran them in the past did not run them well. Basically, spent all their money, and they're like, "Sir, when are we getting money? Check the rules." "Sir, we only make 300,000. "Yeah, but we have 10 players we want to train. So you're going to have to make some choices. "But sir, then we won't be so good." That'll happen. Okay? So again, just like any business, you're dealing with a finite resource, money, and you're dealing with infinite wants in terms of training assets, which are your players, to improve them so you can do better. So please, you might want to check this out and just read the rules. This also explains the player value, which, again, I wouldn't really worry about this right now. Okay, this is more for later that you'll want to sort of start calculating this. And then finally, it also tells you, now this is something you will want to consider when considering a team, how many players at each position your team should have. Now realize most teams do not have all of these. But that's okay. Every year you draft 2 players. Some years you only draft 1, but for the most part every year you're going to draft 2 players. Which means that if you're short 2 props, for instance, or 2 locks, you only have 2 locks, okay, then you can draft 2 locks this coming season and you'll be fine next season. Well, except they won't be that good, but I digress. Okay. And then finally you have training. Oops, didn't click it there. Okay. And so you have different ways you can train your players. You can individually train, which is $100,000 100,000 euros per player. Okay. Ideal in euros just because during one part of the curriculum we have to talk about currency conversion and different currencies, and so I figure if we start off talking in euros, you'll realize that not everything is in dollars. Okay, so that's why we use euros. Okay, so you can individually train, and that increases 2 of those skills. So if we're looking here, that might increase speed and acceleration, for instance, by 20 for speed and 20 for acceleration with 1 individual training for that season. And then what that does to our overall skill, it varies depending on a whole number of factors I'm not going to get into. Okay, or you can power train them, which increase for 300,000. You can increase up to 5 skills. And again, if you're doing the math on this, you can see that over the long run, this will be better. Over the short run, this will be better, but long run, not as good as doing this 3 seasons in a row. So again, opportunity cost, which we'll explain what that means later. There's also automatic training. As I said, once they turn 30, you may see a decrease in skill. And a couple other things that you're going to want to read about when training those players. Finally, you have access to previous seasons. I would really only worry about the 2045 season because it sort of shows you what happens. Okay, so right now we're in the preseason, and then eventually you start having the regular season where you see your matches and you can see how the results were, for instance, and what the standings are in your specific division. And as a result, how much money you're going to make at the end of the season based off of that. And then, of course, you have the off-season, preseason. Okay. If there's any other questions, I'll go through them. But again, by the end of this week, we're hoping that you will be able to choose a company. And so again, you will want to take into account the net worth of teams, the budget of teams, the starting value of teams, the bench and reserves, the ages of players, and whether they have enough players at specific positions. Okay. If you have any other questions, do let me know. And have a good day. Thanks for watching. Cheers.